look, I after my FBI career, I did go into corporate security at a high level. And I can tell you that the security posture varies widely among companies based on the CEO's stance on this. So I can tell you that many CEOs think it's a bad look to have a detail on them, and think it's even worse if they're armed, because then there's serious bad look and optics and liability if they have to shoot somebody. So it's often the CEOs from the biggest companies who say, no, you know what, stay over there. You're kind of a logistics guy for me, get my suitcases in the limo. Okay, that's not good, but that's what happens. And that may have been the case at United. I can tell you this, in talking to my peer group in corporate security, this has opened a lot of CEOs' eyes, and they're suddenly very interested in having security.
Yeah. Welcome back to Just the Facts with me, the Watergate girl, Jill Wine-Banks, and today's special guest is my friend and MSNBC colleague, Frank Fugluzzi. I am so excited, Frank, to have you with us. I know that everyone knows you from MSNBC, NBC, but just to make sure, I'm saying that that's where you have your TV appearances, but you're also an author, and I want to talk about that today too. So welcome to the show.
Jill, hi. I'm glad we could get this in. It's a busy season, both in our lives and on the news, with lots going on. And I'm glad I actually get to take a break from all the on-air time.
Great. Well, this is on air too, because we're a YouTube show, so people are watching us. And
yes.
I want to point out, I don't know if you noticed, I'm wearing a very large badge. I don't know if you can see this.
Yes, but whose badge is it, Jill? You're on this badge. Just the facts. Yeah.
Just the facts. It's my show and my name, and it was modeled after the badge I had as Deputy Attorney General of Illinois. And
awesome.
So I love it. I mean,
it's a nice badge.
Yes.
Even bordering on it, what they call a shield badge. But
yes, exactly.
Yeah. And of course, Dragnet, Jack Webb, all of that. Just the facts, right?
Well, that's what sort of inspired me. Was I was a big fan of Sergeant Joe Friday, Dragnet, who always started the show with "Just the facts, ma'am," and that's what I really want to focus on. And by the way, for our viewers, I want to make sure that they know what your role was in the FBI, because that's why you are this national security expert for MSNBC, is because of your work in counterterrorism, your many years with the FBI. And so we're going to start with the Luigi Mangione. I think that when I first invited you, that was the only thing that I wanted to talk about. Of course, unfortunately, yesterday, there was another school shooting. And so I do want to talk about that. Mm-hmm. And I also want to talk about your book, Long Haul.
Sure.
But let's start with Luigi.
Sure.
And first of all, sort of just summarize for our listeners, although they probably know, sort of what happened. I mean, how did this brazen murder on the streets of New York in broad daylight, just blocks from where you and I have often met at NBC's studio?
And I've stayed at that Hilton, and I've spoken at that Hilton to the New York Bar Association.
Yeah, I've stayed at that Hilton too, because it's very close and convenient to NBC.
Yeah.
But I mean, how often are planned murders committed in broad daylight in a public place with dozens of people surrounding? And how does someone just walk to a bike and then bike away and escape for that long when his picture was all over from surrounding cameras, some of them pretty darn clear? Do you think his family or school friends called in, or was he really not identified by name?
These are great questions. I asked the same, after hours on the air trying to make sense of this. And the answer to your question as to, how often does this happen? This is a targeted killing. And so targeted killings. And by that, I mean, I don't mean a street fight. I don't mean a gang member rolling up on another gang member from an opposing gang. What I'm talking about is a planned hit, and particularly at the CEO level, is relatively rare. It really is. And then, the larger question is, this young man disappeared from his family and friends for something like 7 months.
Yeah.
That also is very rare because we've studied killers. And when someone's on the pathway to violence, they do have a period of time right before they act out violently where they do disappear. There's an isolation period. But I've never seen a 7-month period of disappearing
Really?
and planning or getting to this point, their flashpoint, as behavioral scientists will call it. And then the larger issue, why, with his face plastered literally all over the world, didn't family and friends call in? Now, we just recently learned, Jill, that his mother did contact authorities. But very late in the game is my understanding. Like a day or two before he was finally arrested. Also, the San Francisco Police Department contacted even the FBI or NYPD and said, hey, we've got a missing person poster, which was indeed created by the shooter's mom. We've got a missing persons poster out here in San Francisco that looks a lot like this guy in the mask. And we're just getting to that now. So the early statements from NYPD at press conferences, hey, this guy was never on our radar screen after they apprehended him. Nope, never. We never had his name in our files. Well, they may want to rethink that statement because the mom did contact folks, as did San Francisco PD. How fast that got into the system, you can imagine the the volume of data that's being entered and automated, and it's rough. I've been there, done that, and it's rough to stay up on all of your leads. And then the larger issue, where's the direct connection between Luigi and Brian Thompson, the CEO? Is there anyone at all, or was Luigi what they call a cause killer or a mission killer, who simply has an ideology and picks his target because it's a symbolic target, not a personal beef target? And it's looking more like that. I remain open to the police saying, hey, we found that he was insured by United Healthcare. But right now, we're not seeing that. We're seeing a troubled young man.
I'm sort of assuming that one of the first things they did in the investigation was to look through the records of United Healthcare to see if he had ever been insured or if he had ever sent threatening emails or any other communication to the company or to the CEO. Wouldn't that have been a logical first step?
I guarantee that. And then particularly, so in the early stages of the investigation, absolutely, you can imagine United Healthcare corporate security being joined at the hip with the police and scrubbing all of their threat files. After my 25 years in the FBI and my retirement from there, I went with a major Fortune 10 company as a corporate security executive. And I can assure you, we had files on what I would call frequent flyers, people who would threaten the CEO or the company. We worked all of those. And yes.
I was going to ask you about that experience, particularly as it relates to the security that he apparently didn't have on the day of the shooting. But before I get to that, I want to go back to one thing you said, which is that he disappeared for about 7 months. Mm-hmm. But am I wrong that he was complaining of back injury to people in Hawaii in a surfing kind of community or something? So he wasn't really disappeared as in the Unabomber who was a loner. He wasn't alone, even though he left his family.
Well, yes. However, for a portion of that 7-month period, he was even out of touch with the Hawaii folks. Yeah. So we don't have an up to date, where were you kind of thing. But yes, Hawaii was the beginning of his kind of disconnecting. And yes,
would it have? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, with regard to the back injury, my understanding is he had a pre-existing back injury from before, and it became apparently very worse after a surfing accident, maybe even his first time surfing. And,
Right.
and, and then the complaints came really fast and furious with his back.
So, all right, we have that set up, but what I'm wondering is, in terms of investigation techniques, something you're really expert in, would it have mattered if the mother had called on day one and said, "Oh my God, that's my son"? And he is, I have to say, a very distinctive looking person. A lot of times you look at a drawing of a person or even a photograph and that's pretty generic. It looks like,
Yeah,
100 different people I know.
I
There
agree.
was something about his face
Mm-hmm.
that was quite unique.
Yeah.
And so I can't believe, I mean, he went to fancy schools. He comes from a very wealthy background. He, at one point, was the valedictorian, so he was well known. I just can't believe that someone didn't call in, but I'm wondering if they had, would it have made any difference? Even if they knew who he was, they didn't know where he was.
So there's no question that having the name of your suspect is immensely helpful
Oh,
because that allows you to try and trace his whereabouts more effectively. Now, um, he had to get to Hawaii somehow, and it wasn't swimming, right? So, he likes Greyhound buses and he likes
yeah.
paying cash. The question would be, did he pay cash to get onto
Mm.
a flight to Hawaii? But even let's assume for the moment that he did. I don't think he did, but even if he did, you're on a flight manifest. You've got to show ID, and your name has to be on a flight manifest. And the police can check without getting into great investigative details. The police can absolutely, relatively quickly, check a massive database to see if you've flown within a certain period of time. So his name would be on there, unless he totally had fake ID and faked out
Well,
the airlines and faked out TSA. But that's less likely. I don't think he was in the kill mode when he traveled to Hawaii. So yes, I do think they would have said, okay, we've got him at least headed to Hawaii, and that would have been immensely helpful.
okay. That surprises me because, okay, so he's in Hawaii, but we know he left quite a ways before
Mm-hmm.
the killing, and we don't know exactly where he was,
Yep.
or where he was in the many days after the killing
Right.
before he was found in Altoona, Pennsylvania. But to me, this is all so amazing. And when we think about cameras, I mean, I see it on television all the time, and I'm so unaware that I'm probably on camera a dozen times a day without knowing that I'm on camera.
It's even broader than that, Jill. Yes, you're right. We're all on camera almost all the time, particularly in major cities, but certainly in businesses and shopping malls. But it's more than that. It's the power of facial recognition, and I'll get
Yeah.
to the issue of him essentially defeating facial recognition software, but allows people and the police to identify you relatively quickly in terms of a match. So let's say they have your face walking down, Fifth Avenue, and they don't know who you are. But what facial recognition does is it will match you to that Facebook photo of your friend's birthday party
Right.
where you're
Wow.
posing, in front of the birthday cake. And wow, and then someone has tagged your name, Jill's at the party. And now they've got you. They've got you. And that's the power of facial recognition. Now, what I think has fascinated people is this guy beat the system and essentially did it.
How?
Well, very simply, with that medical mask and a hoodie, meant that there wasn't enough real estate, as we say, that's the high-tech term. No, pixels, right? All of that. There wasn't enough real estate for facial recognition to do its magic.
What about the picture where he was flirting and pulled down his mask?
Yeah, and I'm told that didn't get a hit either in the facial recognition. So he's so bright, and his degree is in AI, computer engineering, and he knows this. He
Wow.
knows that, and I think that was part of the mask.
So anything about his psychology that you think might have led to this
Did
horrific act?
I did pour over his social media, and I mean from X to LinkedIn to Goodreads. I became familiar with Goodreads because I have 2 books that I've authored, and so I know that everybody is waiting for that. Often, first or second review will be from Goodreads, and you can. It's almost like a massive book club. You can list the books you're reading this year. You can review the books. Well, guess what? He was a voracious reader, and I looked through the books he's been reading. And the guy is cerebral for sure. He's a deep thinker and a kind of philosopher. He did a lengthy review of the Unabomber's manifesto. And that caught my attention because at the end of the review, he writes that I think the Unabomber's kind of wrong on some things. I do think there is a moral and ethical argument for killing people sometimes, and particularly in the area of corporate greed.
So does all of that lead you to say there's no insanity defense available to him, that the counter arguments are pretty strong?
So I will openly admit I'm not a New York expert on how New York handles insanity, and you might know far more than I do. But I think I have to say, with all of the forensics coming back, rumors that they got DNA off of the water bottle found at the scene, I think he's done. And I don't, I think he's got 2 hopes. He's got jury nullification because people seem to love the idea of what he did. Everybody's got their horror stories with their healthcare insurance, which, by the way, upsets me, but I'm listening. And then he's got insanity. And it's hard because the degree of planning, he's confessed. Yes. He's apologized in his writings. This had to get done. The parasites had it coming. So, I mean, it's tantamount to confession.
Yeah, I think the evidence, both of his being found with the gun that appears to be the gun in the shooting, that he had these writings with him, that he had inscribed on the bullet casings, deny, delay, depose. Yep. I think there seems to be so much pre-planning, so much malice aforethought that it would be hard to raise any kind of insanity defense. I am a New York lawyer, and I don't think it's going to work.
No, I agree.
And to your point, he clearly did seem to want to get a message out. And he's become a modern day John Dillinger, who was going after banks because of bank failures, or was revered because that's what he was perceived as. Obviously, he was going after because it made him a lot of money. Mm-hmm. But there's something wrong in my mind with the country when we can revere someone who commits a cold-blooded murder in broad daylight to make a point.
Yeah.
He has started a discussion that, as you say, is a valuable discussion about the insurance companies and about medical care.
Sure. I've learned
murder is not the answer.
No, it's not. And of course, I've tried pushing back, on even my own followers on social media. Yeah. And they're not buying it. Well, Frank, he killed 10 million people. Wow. Oh, okay. Yep. I do know. I've learned a lot. United Healthcare. I can see why Luigi chose them. If this was symbolic, they are considered by many to be the most egregious deniers of claims. When they went to an algorithm to decide claims, they doubled their denials. It's not good. I get it. And he's the kind of deep researcher and thinker that would have discovered that.
Which, again, counters his mental incapacity or insanity defenses. But
in terms of planning, not to mention, he spent 10 days on the ground in Manhattan. So this isn't a crime of passion. This wasn't spontaneous.
Yeah. So speaking of crimes of passion or where we don't know the motive, let's move to my neighboring state, Madison, Wisconsin, and the fact that there was another unfortunate school shooting. As far as today goes, at least as of the time of recording, a teacher and a student are dead. 2 are in critical condition, and several others were injured but have been released from the hospital. The shooting is unique in that not unique, but is in that rare small percentage. It was a 15-year-old girl who shot these students. And that's pretty much, I think, all we know. Is there anything else you know to add to the story right now?
I mean, uh, well, look, she was definitely a student there. This happened in a study hall, like early in the morning, with very mixed age levels in that study hall classroom, which is really kind of interesting.
And a second grader is the one who called
Yeah,
the police chief said, just let that sink in.
I know.
Second grader called in an active shooter
who may have been no more than 7 years old, 8 years old tops. Yeah, it's heartbreaking. And the other, investigatively, the chief of police is talking a lot, and I kind of understand the transparency need, and then kind of don't. But I've inferred from his comments that she may have not taken this gun from her own home. This may have come from somewhere else, and that's a mystery, and that's hard. That's hard. Tracking a gun that's kind of in the wind. The ATF will get to the last known registered owner, but she couldn't buy a gun at 15, a pistol at 15. So it came from somewhere else. They'll have to figure that out, and then all the search warrants that go with devices and scrubbing those devices, laptop, phones, see what she's thinking. And then this alleged possible manifesto, they're calling it. I don't like that word because it elevates someone's a killer's ideology, but allegedly there's something out there with her writing. So that will help tremendously. And of course, if it's true that the gun didn't come from her house and wasn't unsecured at her house, we're probably not looking at charging the parents, but maybe somebody else.
Let's talk about the gun, because the Luigi Mangione used a ghost gun that was 3D printed. Mm-hmm. And that to me is astounding. There is a case pending in the Supreme Court that will determine whether such guns are considered guns for regulation purposes, which, I mean, the Solicitor General who argued that case, saying that they should be regulated, no experience with guns, bought a kit, and in 3 hours was able to put it together. That is, doesn't mean the parts are not guns, but the gun here does not, at least hasn't been reported as a ghost gun. Ghost guns are problematic because they're not regulated, because there's no serial numbers on them.
That's right.
So they're harder to trace. But overall, the question I have is, normally you investigate to find who did it. Well, this isn't a whodunit. We know who did it.
Right. No one's going to get prosecuted.
It's a question of why did she do it, and why does that matter? And it would matter if we would pass laws that would intervene and prevent whatever happened. But so far, this country has shown absolutely no appetite for passing any laws that will protect our students in schools, our religious people in churches, in malls, anything. So what's the purpose of investigating? Why are we spending resources on this?
Well, first, I'm in total agreement with you. If Newtown Sandy Hook Elementary School didn't do it for people, then nothing will. We've had some baby steps around the periphery of gun law enforcement that I do credit, like Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, with really driving that. He comes from the state where Newtown Sandy Hook happened. So we've done little things around the edges, but no, we're not getting to the heart of the problem. Some state governors, I'm sure, would tell you, we've done something illegally to protect our kids. We've mandated school resource officers armed in every school in the state. But of course, that doesn't get you first of all, by the way, the data on that, on armed school resource officers, is it doesn't make a whit of difference in most cases. There's only a tiny, maybe 2 instances where a school resource officer actually prevented or was able to shoot a shooter. So,
and how did she even get the gun into the school? I mean, this is an insider. This is not someone who came through an unlocked door. She's a student there and had every right to be in the school, not with a gun, though. How did the gun get through security?
I heard the principal at the press conference speak, and she, again, remember, small K through 12, maybe 350 students, religious Christian school. No, don't fall under any mandates for security. They said they did a, quote, visual screen at the entrance of the school. Wonderful. But that might detect a shotgun, but it's not, it's not going to help with the 9mm in the backpack for sure. And so this is where we are. And it's particularly vulnerable are those private schools. They really are. I think there's often a mentality in some that this is never going to happen to us. This happens in public schools. But here we are. The ghost gun thing, we should all closely watch the Supreme Court case because this is huge. The police are telling us that they increasingly find ghost guns at the scenes of crimes. And they're not, it's interesting, ghost guns are not federally illegal in and of themselves, but rather if there's so little metal and it's mostly polymer, plastic, they can't be detected with a magnetometer and there's no serial number, as you said. So that's then they become illegal, but not all ghost guns are illegal. It's very interesting.
Right. But the question is whether they should be. And Scrimeti is the name of the case. And that'll be an interesting one. It's already been argued. So it's got to be decided before the end of the term. And it's become obviously much more interesting because of Luigi Mangione using a ghost gun and our Solicitor General being able to put together a kit without any drilling or anything else of any skill set.
I've seen it. I've seen it happen. You can go to your library and sign out a 3D printer or just reserve time on it in a room and build your gun right there in your local library.
Well, is there anything that President Biden or Congress could do in the remaining few days before adjournment to make a difference in this matter? Or is there anything that they should start longer range?
So I do think that Biden has done virtually everything he could do with his executive powers. With regard to long range, I'm deeply concerned, Jill, about the future of the ATF. This is the tiny little agency, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, that we ask to please keep us safe from guns and gun violence. And I've often said, if you want to know how seriously a country takes its gun violence problem, just look at how they fund the agency responsible for gun safety. And we don't. We have an agency of maybe 3,000 people who are assigned around the world, in part to stop guns from flowing into the United States. We ask those people to trace stolen guns, ghost guns, enforce background check laws for unlicensed dealers, gun shows.
Wow.
And oh, by the way, since there are alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives, please work all the bombing investigations. Please track the tax payments on alcohol and tobacco. And we're going to do that with 3,000 people. And oh, by the way, this year, we cut your budget by $50 million. And what the president-elect, Trump, is saying, or at least his advisors, is we should be prepared for either ATF to go away or be slashed significantly to focus only on explosives, or no leader and or no director. We've seen this before, by the way, no director named. So the current director, Steve Dettelbach, would potentially be fired, almost a certainty, and then not replaced. So you have a leaderless organization that just kind of dies on the vine.
You're going to get me started on all the parade of horribles that I foresee in the next administration that we are facing. This would be one, but there are so many that I care about. I mean, I care about all of them. Yeah. I served in the Pentagon, so I am very concerned about Hegseth. I am concerned about, Tulsi Gabbard. We just had a revolution in Syria. She was in favor of the person thrown out.
She was.
I mean, we could go through, today's news happens to be RFK Jr. And I think this one, even McConnell's going to push back against because he had polio. He knows the danger of polio.
Yes, he did, yes.
I mean, there's just, that's a whole different conversation. Let's move to something happier.
Oh, please.
Although it's not happy.
Yeah.
And that is your book, Long Haul. And I have read part of it, and I really, it's so different than your first book, The FBI Way, which is a very serious analytic book. This is serious and analytic too, but in a very different storytelling way. This is really about the culture of long haul drivers and an FBI task force looking at highway killings,
Yes.
mass murders.
Yes.
And first of all, I just want to know why the number of killings isn't more focused on. I mean, we have 300 to 500,000 long haul drivers. So
At
we're
least.
only talking about a teeny percentage. And I have family members who are long haul drivers. They are good and decent people. These are not,
vast majority.
No one please misunderstand Frank's point in this book or my asking questions about it. But if you're hitchhiking and you get in a long haul truck, you're crazy. I mean, it's just too high a risk, even though it's a teeny percentage. Do you want to take that % chance?
So I was compelled to write this book. I really felt it was going to write itself. Of course, I was wrong about that, but it's doing quite well, and it's reaching people in a way that I wanted to see happen, which is people who have been victimized, people who help women who've been trafficked, sex trafficked. It's helping law enforcement. And it's opening people's eyes to what's going on right in their own community or right in that truck who's right next to them. I partially dedicate the book to long haul truckers because they are such an integral part of our economy. It's astounding.
Absolutely.
I came away very impressed with them. And I love being in the field as an FBI agent. I spent too much time at headquarters, but I love my time in the field. And when I heard about this initiative, and many people make the assumption, oh, Frank, you're writing about something you worked on as an agent. No, that's actually what got my juices flowing. Was I heard about this after I retired. I had heard a little bit about it, but I never intersected with it in my career. But when I talked to a woman who said, I work at the FBI, and I asked her, what do you do? She said, I head up the Highway Serial Killings Initiative. And I said, okay, hold on. What is that? And it was the numbers that grabbed me. Over 800 women murdered alongside our nation's highways, mostly sex trafficked victims. When I asked how many cases are currently unsolved, 200. When I asked how many long haul trucker suspects were being worked right now, 450. And then she says, 25 long haul truckers are already in prison for multiple homicides, and we're still not, solving all of these. So that caused me to go on the road. I actually found a cooperative trucker. I drove over 2,000 miles in a big rig. It happened to be flatbed. And I learned about the whole caste system of different kinds of trucks and truckers, which plays into trying to focus. When somebody tells me there's 450 suspects, I got to narrow that down, right? That's not good. That's too big. So I get into the psychology of different kinds of truckers who drive different kinds of trucks, the mental and physical engagement required with that load. I ask the nature or nurture question, how do you get a serial killer trucker? And of course, it is nature and nurture.
When you say how do you get, you didn't mean how you capture. You meant how does someone become a mass murderer?
And look, serial killer truckers are no different than other serial killers. They just happen to drive a truck. Now, long haul trucking is the number one profession of serial killers by far. So they are there.
What are the statistics on that? I didn't know.
Well, there's nothing even close. All the studies I looked at, I mean, it's not accountants, it's not construction workers, and it's the nature of the job. It's the isolation, days on end on rural highways across the country, and the ability to be in free states in 3 hours in some parts of the country. You grab your victim in one jurisdiction, you kill and or rape her in a second, you dump her remains in a third, and it is a nightmare for the poor rural county sheriff's deputy who says, there's a body alongside my highway, right? That sheriff's office may not even have a detective, let alone a crime analyst. And Now what? I got to figure out what trucks, cars have been through my highway in the last 6 weeks. The coroner says she's been there 6 weeks, right? That's where the FBI comes in.
Yeah. And I think you also point out that the victims are less valued than the CEO of United Healthcare. And that plays into, you talk about the three seams, and that plays into why there are so many unsolved. Is that correct? Am I interpreting your writing correctly?
I did not want to write a book. The typical true crime book can be very much, and this is dark, of course, but and I do spend time on the killers, the most notorious killers, but I wanted to write a book about three subcultures: long haul trucking, sex trafficked victims, and crime analysts. And I wanted to feature the victims who can no longer speak for themselves because they're dead, whose families don't even know that they're missing, let alone dead, because they got written off a long time ago. And their murders go to the bottom of the inbox at a sheriff's office or police department. No one is banging on the desk at the police department. What are you doing to find my daughter? That's almost never happening. And so, I interviewed survivors and thrivers, women who had survived violent encounters with truckers. I interviewed the top experts on sex trafficking in the country, the top crime analysts, who, by the way, no surprise to you, the top crime analysts in this area are women.
Well, all I can say to our audience is that it's a good read and
Thank you.
Definitely worth your time. It's called Long Haul by Frank Fugluzzi, and I highly recommend it to all of you. It is not a whodunit so much as why.
Exactly.
And, that leads to how do we stop it in the same way, if Luigi Mangione hadn't killed a CEO and didn't come from this incredible wealthy background, he might not have gotten any attention either, but he killed a high profile person. Yeah. I forgot to ask you, going back, about the security in that case. Sorry I thought we were done, but just that one more question.
No, it's a free flowing discussion. Yeah. And look, I after my FBI career, I did go into corporate security at a high level. And I can tell you that the security posture varies widely among companies based on the CEO's stance on this. So I can tell you that many CEOs think it's a bad look to have a detail on them, and think it's even worse if they're armed, because then there's serious bad look and optics and liability if they have to shoot somebody. So it's often the CEOs from the biggest companies who say, no, you know what, stay over there. You're kind of a logistics guy for me, get my suitcases in the limo. Okay, that's not good, but that's what happens. And that may have been the case at United. I can tell you this, in talking to my peer group in corporate security, this has opened a lot of CEOs' eyes, and they're suddenly very interested in having security. Yeah.
It's when we talk about past jobs, at one point I became a corporate officer, first in telecommunications at Motorola, then in white goods, appliances, the big appliances at Maytag. And one of our big customers was the trucks. And people don't realize that in those cabins, there are really, there are stoves and beds. And it's, as I understand it, you actually slept in the cabin of the truck with
I slept in that top bunk of the sleeper berth. And there's a refrigerator. I happened to be paired with a trucker.
Did you see if it was a Maytag one?
I don't think it was, because he's quite cheap. But
that's okay, because Maytag was sold and it's no longer. What can I say?
I'll tell you, it's not the Ritz-Carlton in the back of that cab, and
it's pretty spacious and comfortable. I mean, I went into one, and it's
surprising. It's surprising. You've got some comforts, but not a lot. I happen to be paired with a driver who graduated from the Culinary Institute of America and had worked as a chef, so he actually cooked for us sometimes.
That fits with one of my other jobs. I was head of career and technical education for the Chicago Public Schools, and culinary was one of our big fields. A lot of people really love that. And it's a great career to teach students. You need to know math, because if you want to multiply a recipe, if you want to divide a recipe, you have to know how to multiply or divide.
That's right. How do you cut that in half, and how many liters, and absolutely, ounces.
But how lucky for you to get good food along the road. I've stayed at a lot of, or eaten at a lot of truck stops, because when I worked at Maytag, oftentimes the only restaurants opened at hours that I was able to eat were on the highway. And
Jill, we have to talk, Jill.
Yeah. What can I say? What can I say?
Yeah, try not to do. In all I've done now, I don't know, many dozens of interviews on the book alone, podcast, radio.
Yeah.
And I always get asked the question about highway safety, particularly for women traveling alone. And unless you can, if you got to go, you got to go. But try not to stop at that major truck stop.
Yeah, that's for sure. Not alone.
No.
Maybe not even with a friend.
Yeah.
So to everyone listening, read Frank's book and come back next week for another episode of #Just the Facts. And we'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for joining us.